always, I just want to say thank you guys for tuning in. You could be doing anything in this world, but you've decided to spend the next 15 minutes right here with me getting motivated. I applaud you. I thank you, and I thank you so much for the support. It means so much. It means so much to me. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into this message. Today, I'm coming out of Galatians 5:16-17. Remember, we use these biblical principles to turn them into practical principles because there's so many of us that read the word or maybe not understand the word, but when we turn them into real life stories, we know how to implement them into our lives. And that you can take throughout your week and you can share and you can be a blessing to someone else. Amen. So, Galatians 5:16-17 says, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh." Then it says they are in conflict with one another. I want to stop right there. It says they are in conflict. The flesh and the spirit are in conflict. That's Galatians 5:16-17. You can read the remainder of the scripture for yourself. But let's get into this message. What are we going to be talking about today? A long time ago, I watched a movie called Trading Places. This movie was, you don't think about the movies when you watch them, but then when things are going on, just like when we read the word, you don't really know what to expect from the word. But when it happens, there it is. So this is how it was for me. Last week I was driving and I started thinking about the way the world is right now. I started thinking and looking at what I see in the news, what my friends and I are talking about, what my family and I are talking about, what other people around are talking about, the politicians, what they're talking about. And it seems to be so much coming back to back. There's so many ways of division and levels of division that are just happening back to back. And I'm always that person to wonder, why is this happening right now? Sometimes you can Google, you can look at certain things or research what's happening in the world and you can pinpoint what's going on. But the reality of it is something is going on. And at times we just get so distracted with all the media, people we talk to, things that are happening around us that we just don't take the time out to really hone in on what that is. And so I was thinking about this movie. I thought about this movie, and there are two main actors in this movie that we all are aware of, Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. If you have not seen the movie, it is a must-see after this message. But the movie is called Trading Places. Eddie Murphy was a savage in this movie. He was the person that would walk the Wall Street streets, and he would pickpocket, ask for money, scrapple for food. Of course, he dressed as a homeless person, and so people who were on the Wall Street towers, they would kind of shoo him away. And then you had Dan Aykroyd, who was the person who was wealthy in this movie, worked Wall Street, was very well off, had a chauffeur, butler, big old house, and that is just how he lived. I think one day Eddie Murphy probably pickpocketed him and maybe took his watch or something like that. But ironically, in this movie, there's also two men who spearheaded what would change the lives of Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy forever. Stay right there. Forever. You have to stay tuned in because there's a challenge at the end of this, but there's also, I'm going to go in more depth with this. So stay right there. So Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy were not only in this movie, but they took part of a transition, a transformation in their lives that changed their lives forever based off of two men and a bet. Can you imagine that? Based off of two men and a bet. Now, I'm going to go through the transformation for the two of them, but then I'm also going to come back to the bet. So Dan Aykroyd, he actually was accused of stealing something within the Wall Street, the organization, was terminated. He lost his house. He lost his cars. He lost his clothes. He had one piece of clothing on him, which was this little coat that had like fur on the top of it, and basically just banned from the community that he knew. And then there was Eddie Murphy, who actually was now brought into this man's life, and he's wealthy. He's now wearing the man's clothes. He is in the man's house. He's driving the man's car. He has the chauffeur, the butler, the women, all of that. Dan Aykroyd sees that it's Eddie Murphy, the person who had pickpocketed him probably days before, and became very, very frustrated. Did not know what was going on with him. Somebody say this with me. All because of a bet. Now I'm going to go back to the bet. The two men, after or during a party, they went into the bathroom and they just decided, millionaires, they just decided that they could change the person's lives or these people's lives forever off of a dollar bet. Can you imagine that? Off of a dollar bet. And I started thinking, what's the bet on our lives right now? And I'm talking about politically. When I see the distractions that are coming our way, when I see the groups of people that are literally going and scrambling against one another, when I see how blatant the racism that we're experiencing right now is, when I see not only blacks going against blacks, whites going against whites, blacks and whites going against one another, the gay community, I see I see every group being attacked right now. And I started to think, how in the world that we're living in right now can we keep being bombarded with this division, a high level of division that seems to be okay? Let me tell you of another movie that I watched a long time ago, and it's called Purge. And shout out to my Uber driver because we were talking about it and I couldn't think of the name, but the movie was called Purge. The government came into an inner city and they wanted to do what they called a trial. And they came into the inner city and they started to give the inner city beings an outlet to release their anger. And in this outlet, the anger should have been placed on the people who were around, the people who literally were in this area. And it was supposed to be an attack on each other. Well, the people who were in the inner city, they were just happy to be free with partying, maybe drugs, maybe, knocking over a phone pole or something like that. And the person doing the experiment, she was taken back by it a little bit, but she had a partner. And this partner thought, I need to get the money for this to happen. I need to get the money for this program to work. This experiment has to work. Somewhere midstream in the movie, all of a sudden these people come in and they're starting to kill. And the person who was doing the experiment, she actually said, this isn't right. How do we go from this to this many murders? No murders to this many murders. And then there was trashing of buildings. There was looting. The killings were not just someone stabbing one another, but these were brutal killings. Does it sound familiar? And when she decided that this was not part of the experiment, you know what happened? And yes, I'm going a little bit deep with this because I need you guys to understand that there's something happening at the top. And then if we continue to listen to the media, if we continue to bombard one another, if we continue to allow the distractions to distract us, we're going to miss the opportunity to come together in unity. Now that's hard right now because there is a high level of division on all fronts. There is a high level of division on all fronts. The spirit and the flesh, they conflict. Not only do you have the blacks going against the blacks, the whites going against the whites, and everybody going against one another, but then you have religions going against religion. How did this happen? It always existed, but it seems to be like the purge allowed. So I ask again, what's the bet on your life? What is the bet on your life? Can you imagine that the higher beings are sitting somewhere and they have a bet that they can change the world forever? Let's not even say that the bet was $1. Let's say it was a penny because they're millionaires. Let's say the bet was someone else doing a vacation or a trip or something like that for the next person or the person who lost. What are they thinking of us down here scrambling the way that we are? There's always a distraction, and that's what I want you guys to understand. There's always a distraction. I remember probably a few years ago where there was something that happened, and all of a sudden this Pokemon game came out. You had people running, adults. They were running to find Pikachu and all these other animals in the woods. They were there in the middle of the streets, distracting cars. And it just seemed to me how fickle our minds can be. That we would just be as adults running in the middle of the road to capture a Pikachu. And within a matter of seconds, it was gone. Within a matter of seconds, it was gone. So what's your challenge today? Your challenge is to wake up. Your challenge is simply to wake up. There is something bigger than us going on. And the reality of it is we do not control the environment as it stands, but just like Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, if we come together, we can control the environment. We can create a future for ourselves, even if it's a segregated future. We can create a future for ourselves. What's happening has been allowed. I'm going to say that again. What's happening has been allowed. I mean, I hear people saying, this has been going on for a long time. But when I look at the news today, this is different. This is different. I know that I'm not the only one who's seen the news. I know I'm not the only one that hears the radio. I know I'm not the only one that knows and sees on social media the divide. And it baffles me how anything can happen more, but it does. You hear one breaking news after another. You see one reform after another. A new law coming into place. A new law coming out of place. And people are hurting. The bottom line is Dan Aykroyd, he was hurt in this movie. He lost everything. He lost life as he knew it. But he gained new experiences. The same thing with Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy got the better part of the deal, but he was able to utilize his savage behavior and work with Dan Aykroyd to defeat the adversary. Y'all, I'm talking a little deep today because I realize the distractions that are put before us. And we become each other's worst enemy. White supremacy, it exists. Racism, it exists. All of it exists. And we at one point may have been living in a world where all of us coexisted, maybe not to the best of our ability. But here we are now, and it's like we cannot even live in the world together. But it's coming from somewhere. Yes, it might come from the person who was raised that way. But there's a difference between what is being allowed. This is blatantly being allowed. What's happening is blatantly being allowed. It may take one phone call, and it could have, just in the movie I was talking about, Trading Places, it may have taken one phone call for these men to say, you know what, stop it. Let life go back to the way it was. They sat back and they laughed. There was a part in the movie where Dan Aykroyd, he came in the house, he saw that they were having Christmas dinner, and he was so upset to see Eddie Murphy sitting at the table. He broke in. Not only did he break in, but he ended up stealing food because he was so hungry. Where everyone else was appalled, these two men, they laughed. They laughed. There are so many people right now who were standing up for certain rights before all this happened. And I love to see the silence in it now. Now is when we need to start speaking up. Now is when we need to start putting our guards up and not down. Now is the time for us to actually come into unity, even if there's a bit of segregation there. But if you could imagine that all of this was created off of a bet, one that we lose and they win. If you look at the media, the world is in turmoil right now. It's in turmoil. And we're sitting back and just allowing it to happen, hate to manifest, all of this division to just continue to take place. But if we can come together like Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, and if we can sit at the Wall Street and look at the numbers tickle down, count down, and then boom, watch how all of their lives can crumble down. I guarantee you, just like the two men in this movie, they weren't smiling at the end, but we can do it. So your challenge today is just wake up. Stop being distracted. Do your research. Understand that there's something greater out there happening.